Our second speaker is Ulrich Schmidel. He's a lecturer at the School of Divinity at the University of Edinburgh. He specializes in theology, politics, and ethics. His research combines systematic theology with both sociology of religion and philosophy of religion. Ulrich's recent research is concerned with the role of religion in migrant and post-migrant contexts and offers a critical analysis and a constructive assessment of the ways in which theological tropes are interpreted and instrumentalized in the current so-called refugee crisis in Europe. This morning he's going to speak to us on a paper entitled A Wrench in the Wheels, Political Theology in the Age of Migration.
I sometimes draw on, in broader sense, social scientific work, but these 2 days have made me realize on what I've been missing out on by not hanging out with anthropologists. One thing I learned is you don't have to wear a tie, which is great. And so I'm not an anthropologist, but I've been having lots of field days recently because I work in a country that is, I guess you could say, held hostage to another country that has sort of dreams and desires and disappointments about sovereignty. And yeah, you might have followed some of the news reportage, and I thought it's a real field day in a way, how we can conceptualize and think through sovereignty in the age of migration. So this is just a headline really, but look at this one. So this is one of the Leave campaign posters. It shows how the Turk sort of walks into the UK through the European passport. Right, so one question of sovereignty is being put on here. By the way, the UK is one of 2 countries in Europe where on the passport the name of the country is written in a bigger font than the European Union. All other European countries, it's the same size, but the UK at the very beginning made sure that the British passport would be slightly different. This one's even better, sort of also talking about what the EU is doing, and all the EU will grow and all these people, all of them obviously will want to go to the UK. Interestingly is also that Syria and Iraq are the only named countries in that poster, although Syria and Iraq probably are not going to be part of the European Union anytime soon. So again, what is that telling us about sovereignty and migration? If you think through what happens to this idea of sovereignty when the migrant comes, it's just clashed. You have no option in that level of thinking sovereignty to account for a migrant. And it's interesting, the text Schmidt goes through, there would be several chances when he talks about Kant, he could talk about he talks about perpetual peace, but he doesn't say anything about the cosmopolitanism in Kant stuff. He just leaves out. So reading this, I thought several times, now it comes, now he says something about the migrant. He never does, or at least I couldn't find anything, because the migrant is simply destructive to that idea of sovereignty. That idea of sovereignty needs a clear inside-outside distinction, and the migrant is the figure that destroys this. So in a way, this idea of sovereignty, you can't do much. The breaking point, if you think about the picture again, is a bad one. Now, the new political theology, and that is sort of a whole bunch of theologians working after the Second World War and very much responding to Carl Schmitt, has a different take on this. I've picked out Dorothee Sölle out of all of them because I find her most helpful because she's the most radical one of these people, I think. These are the books I've used that I find most helpful, and just for I think the death of God is a key category for her, and that might be something that we need to resurrect, the death of God. But also, if you try to bring it on a formula again, as I think what we have here is sovereign, the sacred, and suffering. And that, I think, is a term we can throw into our discussions, like what does suffering do to concepts of sovereignty. The suffering idea is huge in the theology after Auschwitz, trying to come to terms with what has happened in Auschwitz. And this is a quote from Jürgen Moltmann, where he's citing Elie Wiesel, an Auschwitz survivor. And he says this: "The SS hanged 2 Jewish men and a youth in front of the whole camp. The man died quickly, but the death throes of the youth lasted for half an hour. Where's God? Where is he?" someone asked behind me. As the youth still hung in torment for a long time, I heard the man call again, "Where is God now?" And I heard a voice in myself answer, "Where is he? He's here. He's hanging there on the gallows." And that's where the Wiesel quote ends, and then Moltmann continues, "Any other answer would be blasphemy. There cannot be any other Christian answer to the question of this torment." And that, I think, is sort of a key scene, if you wish, for the theology after Auschwitz. How can we think God? How can we think sovereignty after what has happened in Auschwitz? And all of them are hung up with this notion of suffering in different ways. So Moltmann does it then in a way that he talks about the suffering God and sort of rescues this then Christologically. Johann Baptist Metz is not so happy to talk about suffering God, but he talks about the memory of suffering and what that does. And Dorothee Söller, I think, pushes it the furthest, so I want to look into this a little bit. So she redefines political theology in direct conversation with Schmid. The others often just pretend Schmid didn't happen and do their own thing, but Söller actually engages with Schmid, quotes Schmid, sort of grapples with him. And in contrast to Schmid, she sort of says political theology is a hermeneutic, so it's a way of understanding something, and a specific hermeneutics, namely one that takes politics as the horizon for the interpretation of God's promise. And that's another interesting move here with everything that happens after Auschwitz is this eschatological turn. So they think about the promise of God in the future and what that does to our thinking, rather than thinking about a fixed idea of the sovereign in the past and how that informs our thinking. And the promise is, of course, a much more slippery category than a strong sovereign. So it's not that God is the sovereign, it's God that has promised something that we now can deal with or not. And politics then is the site where that happens, where Christian praxis happens, where we sort of follow or try to sort out what it could mean that we've been promised a different kind of world by God.